The Millionaire Whose Soul Was Healed by a Widow. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The sound of the ocean had always comforted Elena Moore. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, she would open the small seaside cafe she had built with her own hands. The smell of fresh coffee and the sound of gentle waves filled the air, wrapping the quiet town in a kind of peace she had fought hard to find. 5 years had passed since her husband, a volunteer doctor, lost his life in a rescue accident. She had been left with a single photo, a box of his letters, and a 7-year-old boy named Ben, her reason to keep living. Elena moved to this coastal town after the tragedy, far from the noise of the city and the pitying stares of people who once knew her. Her days were predictable, calm, and sometimes painfully quiet. Ben would run along the shore collecting shells, his laughter echoing across the sand, while Elena served her regulars, fishermen, tourists, and retirees who loved her pies. Life was modest, but it was hers. That peace changed the day a dark-colored SUV stopped in front of her cafe. The man who stepped out did not belong to this town. He wore a suit that did not fit the ocean breeze, shoes polished to perfection, and eyes that carried more silence than words ever could. His name was Lucas Hayes, once one of the most brilliant investors in the country, now a man who had disappeared from the headlines without explanation. He asked if the house across the street was still for rent. Elena nodded and pointed him to the owner next door. She could tell he was someone used to control, but at that moment he looked lost. The kind of loss that does not come from missing a place, but from missing oneself. That evening, after closing the cafe, she saw him again standing on the porch of the rented house, staring at the sea like he was searching for something buried beneath the waves. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough for her to sense the grief behind his calm face. Elena was used to recognizing pain. It had the same stillness her husband had before every dangerous mission. A few days later, Lucas began visiting her cafe each morning. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee, no sugar. He never stayed long, but he always left a generous tip. Ben liked him immediately, calling him the quiet man. And though Elena said little, she found herself wondering what kind of sorrow could silence a man so completely. One afternoon, a storm rolled in early. The rain came heavy, the power went out, and the cafe turned dark. Lucas stayed behind to help her move the outdoor chairs. When lightning struck nearby, Ben screamed, and without thinking, Lucas pulled the boy into his arms. For a split second, his face showed a kind of panic, the fear of someone who had lost before and was terrified to lose again. After the storm, Elena thanked him. He only nodded, whispering that he once lost someone he could not protect. Then he left before she could ask more. That night, as the sea calmed and Ben fell asleep, Elena looked out the window and saw a faint light coming from Lucas's house. Through the rain-blurred glass, he sat alone at a table covered with papers, his hands buried in his hair. Something inside her stirred a quiet understanding that their lives were about to intertwine in ways neither could imagine. The next morning, Lucas returned to the cafe, not for coffee, but with a question that would change everything. His voice was steady but tired when he said, "Mrs. Moore, would you ever consider pretending to be someone's wife?" The room fell silent. Outside, the waves crashed against the shore as if the sea itself was holding its breath. And that was how it began, a proposal not of love, but of need. A contract between two broken hearts, unaware that the act of pretending might lead them to something painfully real. Elena stared at Lucas, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Pretending to be someone's wife was not a question she expected from the quiet man who barely spoke 10 words a day. The morning light filtered through the cafe windows, turning the dust in the air into slow, dancing specks. Ben was outside chasing a stray cat, laughing in the distance, unaware that his mother's life was about to change. Lucas stood at the counter, both hands in his pockets, his voice calm but heavy. "I understand how strange this sounds," he said, "but I need someone I can trust. Someone who does not want anything from me." Elena set down the cup she had been wiping. "You want me to lie?" she asked softly. "I want you to help me close the chapter," he replied. His gaze stayed fixed on the window, on the horizon where the sea met the sky. There is a condition in my late wife's foundation. To release the final fund, the board must believe I have moved on, that I am capable of love again. It is not about money for me. It is about letting go. But they need to see proof. She did not answer right away. The idea was absurd, and yet his tone carried a quiet honesty. Why me? She finally asked. Because you are real, Lucas said. You are not from my world. You do not care who I was, and people here believe you. They would never question your kindness. Elena hesitated. Her life had been simple, predictable. She had fought too hard for peace to step into someone else's illusion. But when Lucas placed an envelope on the table, her heart stopped. Inside was a figure that could pay for Ben's medical treatment for a full year. His chronic lung condition had been stable but would soon require a special device they could not afford. This is not charity, Lucas said. It is a contract, 6 months. You and your son will move into my house. We will appear as a family for photographs and social events. After that, you are free to walk away. Oh, she looked down at the envelope, then at his face. His eyes carried a depth she recognized, the same kind of pain that once lived in her own. You think pretending to love will help you forget? She asked. I do not want to forget, he whispered. I want to learn how to live with it. The words hung in the air. They were the first honest things she had heard from him. That night, Elena sat by Ben's bedside while he slept. The ocean wind brushed through the curtains, carrying the faint sound of waves. She thought about her husband, how he had once believed that helping others was the way to heal. Maybe this was her turn to help someone else. Or maybe it was foolish. But in her heart, she knew that people who are truly broken sometimes find one another by accident. The next morning, she returned to Lucas's house. He was already waiting with a folder on the porch. The table between them held a cup of black coffee for him and one with milk for her, a detail she did not expect him to remember. He explained the rules. Attend charity events as his wife, appear at the annual memorial for his late spouse, and allow the press to take family photographs. In return, he would pay her monthly and cover all expenses for Ben's health and schooling. Elena signed with a trembling hand. Lucas extended his, and for the first time since they met, he smiled faintly. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, but one that admits it exists. By evening, boxes from her cafe apartment were stacked in the hallway of his house by the sea. Ben ran through the rooms in excitement, calling out for his mother to see the big window that faced the ocean. Elena stood at the doorway, feeling both safe and uncertain. Lucas watched quietly, his hands resting in his pockets again. Welcome home, he said, almost as if testing the words on his tongue. She replied gently, It is only temporary. He nodded. So was my pain, he said, and walked toward the shore as the sun set behind him. From that moment on, the contract was no longer just ink and paper. It was two hearts learning to coexist, not yet love, not yet healing, but the fragile beginning of both. The first week of their new arrangement felt like living inside a quiet storm. Elena moved through Lucas's large oceanfront home like a guest who was afraid to touch anything. Every sound echoed the clink of a spoon, the hum of the refrigerator. Even Ben's laughter seemed too bright for the polished silence that surrounded them. The house looked beautiful but cold, decorated in marble and glass, with no trace of warmth or personality. It was the kind of place that looked perfect in photographs, but felt empty when you tried to breathe inside it. Lucas kept his word about the contract. He arranged for Ben's new doctor, paid for his medication, and even added Elena's cafe business into a trust under her name. He treated everything with efficiency, like another investment deal. But beyond the surface, he was distant, polite, reserved, almost mechanical. Every morning, he left for meetings in the city, returning only at dusk. Sometimes Elena would hear him pacing in the hallway late at night, his steps restless and uneven, as if something inside him refused to let him sleep. Ben, on the other hand, adored him. He would wait by the window for Lucas's car headlights and run to the door before the engine stopped. One evening, Ben left a drawing on Lucas's desk, a stick figure family with the words, Mom, me, and Mr. Lucas. When Lucas saw it, he froze. He stared at the drawing for a long time, his fingers trembling slightly before he placed it inside a drawer. That night, at dinner, Elena asked, Do you ever miss your old life? Lucas did not answer right away. Finally, he said, I miss who I thought I was, but I do not miss the man who forgot what really mattered. His voice was steady, but his eyes said more than his words. Later that week, They attended the first event required by the contract, a charity auction, in honor of his late wife's foundation. The ballroom was filled with journalists, investors, and board members who greeted Lucas with polite admiration. Elena wore a simple navy dress that she had not taken out of her closet for years. When she entered beside him, the crowd whispered, everyone knew Lucas Hayes, the man who vanished from Wall Street after the tragedy. And now, he had returned with a woman and a child. Throughout the evening, Lucas played his role perfectly. He introduced Elena as his wife, smiled for the cameras, and placed his hand gently on her back when they posed for photos. His charm returned like an old habit, but behind every gesture, there was something else, a quiet sincerity that made Elena's heart tighten without reason. At the end of the event, an elderly woman approached them. She was a former nurse who had worked with Lucas's late wife. Her eyes softened when she saw Ben clutching Elena's hand. She said gently, "It is good to see you with a family again, Mr. Hayes." She would have wanted that. Lucas's smile faltered for the first time that night. He thanked the woman, but his voice cracked slightly. As they walked to the car, he remained silent, his hands clenched around the steering wheel. Elena could feel the weight of memory pressing between them. When they arrived home, she turned to him and said quietly, "You do not have to keep pretending with me." Lucas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I am not pretending," he said, "at least not all the time." For a moment, the air between them shifted, not romantic yet, but fragile and human. He reached into his pocket and handed her the small pearl bracelet that had belonged to his late wife. "Wear this for the next event," he said softly. She believed pearls bring calm. Elena hesitated but took it, feeling the chill of its surface. "Thank you," she whispered. After she went upstairs, Lucas stood alone in the living room, staring at the ocean through the glass wall. The reflection of the waves shimmered against his face, and for the first time in years, he allowed a single tear to fall quickly wiped away before it reached his chin. In another room, Elena looked at the bracelet resting in her hand. It was a symbol of a woman she would never meet, a love she could never replace, and yet, for reasons she could not explain, it already felt like part of her own story. Somewhere between the lines of that contract, something unspoken had begun, something neither of them dared to name. By the third month, the house by the sea no longer felt like a stranger's home. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried softer sounds, the hum of Ben's laughter, the faint clatter of dishes, and the occasional creak of the old piano that sat unused for years. Elena had started baking again, filling the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and vanilla. Lucas often came downstairs earlier than usual, pretending to check his phone, but always staying long enough to drink his coffee while she worked. Every morning, Ben would sit at the table with his crayons, drawing pictures of the three of them together. When Lucas asked why he never drew anyone else, Ben answered simply, "Because it is just us now." The innocence in the boy's voice touched something deep inside Lucas, a place he thought had died long ago. One Saturday, Elena decided to take Ben to the farmer's market in town. Lucas, who rarely joined them for anything beyond work or formal gatherings, surprised her by saying he would come along. He walked beside them quietly, carrying a bag of apples while Elena chatted with the local vendors. Several people recognized her and waved, whispering about how the widow and the quiet millionaire looked like a family. Lucas heard it but said nothing. Instead, he bought a small jar of honey from an old couple and handed it to Elena. "For your tea," he said, "you always add too much sugar." She smiled, the kind of smile that stayed with him even after they got home. As weeks passed, their daily routines began to intertwine in ways neither of them planned. Elena left notes on the refrigerator reminding him to eat dinner. Lucas fixed the broken swing in the backyard for Ben. He started reading bedtime stories when Elena was too tired, his deep voice softening as he spoke. It was no longer just a performance for outsiders. It was a rhythm, quiet and real, that slipped into their lives without permission. One evening, the power went out again during a coastal storm. Thunder rolled over the sea, and Ben hid under a blanket. Lucas lit a few candles and sat beside him, telling stories about constellations he used to watch when he was a child. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart aching at how natural he looked, how safe. When the storm passed, Ben had fallen asleep against Lucas's shoulder. Elena whispered, "You are good with him." Lucas glanced down at the sleeping boy and said quietly, "He reminds me that I am still capable of protecting someone." Later that night, after putting Ben to bed, Elena found Lucas sitting on the porch with a glass of water, staring at the moonlight rippling on the ocean. She joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You make this house feel alive again." His voice carried no charm, no performance, only truth. Elena turned toward him, unsure how to respond. "Maybe it just needed a little noise," she said softly. They sat together until the waves calmed. It was the first time in years that Lucas did not feel the weight of guilt pressing on his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what peace might feel like. But peace rarely lasts long for those who carry ghosts. A few days later, a man from the foundation visited. He brought folders, photographs, and a subtle reminder that the contract would be reviewed soon. The board needed more evidence of Lucas's emotional recovery. There would be another event, a memorial held in the same city where his wife had died. That night, Lucas told Elena about it. He tried to sound indifferent, but his voice trembled. "It will not be easy," he said. "You do not have to go if you do not want to." Elena shook her head. "We are supposed to do this together, remember?" He looked at her, then really looked, and for a moment, it felt as though the distance between them disappeared. "Thank you," he whispered. When she went to bed, Lucas remained on the porch, staring at the dark waves. For months, he had built a fragile world where pain seemed far away. But he knew that returning to that city meant facing the truth he had buried and the night that had taken everything from him. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, the salt air heavy with memory. Inside the house, a framed drawing by Ben sat on the hallway table, three stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sundae. For the first time, Lucas whispered a silent prayer that this small, imperfect picture might one day become real. The day of the memorial arrived with gray skies and a cold wind that carried the scent of rain. Elena helped Ben with his tie while Lucas stood by the window, his reflection pale against the glass. He had not returned to the city in years, not since the night of the accident. The drive there was quiet. Ben fell asleep in the back seat, clutching his small stuffed bear, while Elena sat beside Lucas, her hands resting in her lap. Every few miles, she could see him tighten his grip on the steering wheel, as if every turn of the road brought him closer to something he did not want to face. When they reached the memorial hall, the place was already filled with flowers, candles, and quiet music. Photographs of Lucas's late wife stood on display, her smile frozen in time. The board members greeted them warmly, shaking Lucas's hand and praising his courage for attending. Elena stood beside him, her fingers brushing his arm to remind him he was not alone. To the public, they looked like a composed couple, but inside, Lucas was breaking apart piece by piece. During the ceremony, a slideshow began images of rescue volunteers, the foundation's early projects, and finally, a photo of the accident site. The sight of twisted metal and flashing lights made Lucas's breath catch. He stepped outside, his chest tight, struggling for air. Elena followed without hesitation, leaving her purse and dignity behind. She found him in the courtyard, his hands shaking as he leaned against the wall. "It should have been me," he said through clenched teeth. "She was on that bus because of me. I told her to take that route." Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "Lucas, it was not your fault." He turned to her, his eyes wet, haunted. "You do not understand. I sent her there. I was supposed to be with her, but I stayed for a meeting. I thought one more deal mattered more than one more day with her." The honesty in his voice broke something inside her. She wanted to speak, but the weight of his pain was too heavy to touch with words. Instead, she stepped closer, resting her hand over his heart. "You are still here," she whispered. "Maybe you were meant to be to make something out of the life she could not finish." For a long moment, they stood in silence as the rain began to fall, light and cold. It soaked through their clothes, but neither moved. When Lucas finally lifted his head, his voice was quiet, trembling. "I have spent years pretending that I can rebuild myself with money and silence. But every time I close my eyes, I still hear her voice." Elena said softly, "Maybe she wants you to listen one last time, not to the guilt, but to what she left behind." Later that night, after they returned to the coastal house, Lucas went to his study and opened a locked drawer. Inside was a single envelope, the letter he had written to his wife years ago but never sent. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. Elena stood by the door, uncertain if she should stay. When he began to read aloud, his voice cracked. "I am sorry I forgot how to love you the way you deserved. I am sorry I let ambition silence the man you married. If I could trade every dollar for one more day with you, I would do it without hesitation." He stopped reading, unable to continue. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She walked toward him and placed her hand on the letter. Then stop trading what is left of your life for regret, she said. You have done enough penance. Lucas looked up at her, exhausted but grateful. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic music, just two people standing in the quiet of their shared pain. It was the first time he allowed someone to see him completely. That night, as the storm outside raged, Elena found him asleep on the couch, the letter resting on his chest. She covered him with a blanket, her fingers brushing his hair away from his face. For a moment, she let herself imagine a life not bound by contracts or guilt, a life built on healing. In another room, Ben whispered a sleepy prayer for Mr. Lucas to stop having nightmares. The wind carried the boy's voice down the hallway, soft and innocent, and for the first time in years, Lucas slept through the night without waking. He did not know it yet, but that night marked the beginning of his slow forgiveness, not from others, but from himself. The morning after the storm, the air smelled of salt and wet pine. The world outside looked clean, as if the rain had washed away more than dust. Lucas woke up later than usual, still on the couch, the forgotten letter resting near his chest. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Ben sitting quietly on the floor, building a tower of blocks. "Good morning," Ben said with a shy smile. "Mom said you were tired." Lucas rubbed his eyes and managed a soft laugh. She was right. I guess I was. Elena appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You slept through the whole night," she said. "That has not happened before, has it?" "No," he admitted. "It felt different, lighter." For the next few days, life moved more gently. Lucas began joining them for breakfast. He helped Ben fix a kite, started walking to the cafe with Elena, and even greeted the neighbors. People noticed the change. The once cold millionaire now smiled when spoken to. But what no one knew was that something inside him was quietly shifting. One afternoon, while organizing the cafe storeroom, Elena came across an old box labeled Donations Rescue Foundation. Inside were faded newsletters, volunteer rosters, and photos from past charity missions. She froze when she saw one picture, a group of volunteers standing near an overturned bus, all wearing matching jackets. Her late husband was among them, and so was a woman she instantly recognized from the memorial photos, Lucas's wife. Her breath caught. The caption below read, "Emergency Response Team, Highway Accident, 5 years ago." Elena's hands trembled. She sat down on the wooden floor, staring at the photograph. It was not just fate that brought them together, it was the same tragedy that had destroyed both their lives. Her husband and Lucas's wife had died in the same crash, on the same night. That evening, she walked home with the box pressed against her chest. Lucas was outside fixing a light on the porch. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, but his expression faded when he noticed her face. "Elena, what is wrong?" She placed the box on the table and pulled out the photograph. "Tell me this is not the same accident," she said softly. "Tell me they were not there together." Lucas stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the image. His face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" "It was in the donation box at the cafe. My husband was on that team. He was a doctor. He was there when your wife—" Her voice broke before she could finish. Lucas looked as though the air had been knocked out of him. He took a step back, shaking his head. "No, it cannot be. I never knew the names of the others. I never asked." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "We lost them on the same night, Lucas. I thought I came here to escape the past, but it followed me to your door." The silence between them stretched long and heavy. The ocean outside roared louder than usual, as if echoing the storm inside their hearts. Lucas finally spoke, his voice raw. "If I had known, I would have never asked you to do this. I would have never put you through it." Elena turned away, wiping her tears. "It does not change what happened," she said, "but it changes everything I thought I knew about us." That night, she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photograph of 2 people who had once shared the same mission, now connected through loss. She wanted to hate fate for its cruelty, but deep down she also understood it had led her here for a reason. The next morning, Lucas found her sitting by the water with Ben playing nearby. He hesitated, unsure whether to speak. "You are leaving," he said quietly. She looked at him but did not answer. He knelt beside her. "I cannot ask you to stay. But please believe me, meeting you was never part of a lie. You and Ben became the only thing that felt real." Elena's voice trembled. "I know. That is what makes it harder. She stood, brushed the sand from her dress, and called to her son. Ben waved at Lucas, innocent and smiling, unaware of the storm between the adults. When they walked away, Lucas stayed there, watching the two figures grow smaller against the horizon. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what healing truly meant, that sometimes the heart must break completely before it learns how to love without fear. That night, the house was silent again. The coffee mug stayed untouched, the piano lid closed. Only the sound of the ocean remained, whispering through the windows like a memory that refused to fade. The next morning came without sunlight. Clouds hung low, and the sea looked darker than usual, like a reflection of what was happening inside the house. Lucas had not seen Elena or Ben since she left the day before. Every corner of the home felt hollow. He tried working, tried reading, but nothing silenced the noise inside his head. He could not stop thinking about the photograph and the truth it revealed. 3 days passed before a small package arrived at the cafe, addressed to Elena but forwarded from the foundation's office. The handwriting was old-fashioned, elegant, and unmistakably feminine. It came from a storage archive where the charity's belongings had been preserved after the accident. Inside was a single envelope, sealed and dated 1 week before the tragedy. The name on it read, Lucas Hayes. Elena held the envelope for a long time before opening it. The letter inside was written by Lucas's late wife, her words gentle but filled with quiet sorrow. If you ever read this, it means I never had the chance to say goodbye. I know how you carry guilt when things go wrong, Lucas. You always try to control what you cannot. Please remember, love does not need perfection. It only needs honesty. If one day you meet someone with a heart that can heal yours, let her love you for me. Elena's tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. She folded the letter carefully, realizing this message was never meant to reach her yet. Somehow, fate had placed it in her hands. That evening, she walked along the beach as the wind pulled at her hair. The horizon glowed faintly gold, and waves brushed against her feet like whispers. She knew she had to return the letter to its rightful owner. When she arrived at the house, the lights were still on. Lucas was sitting on the porch staring into the dark ocean. He looked up when she approached but said nothing. I found something that belongs to you, she said quietly, handing him the envelope. He hesitated, then took it. When he saw the handwriting, his face went pale. Where did you get this? It was sent from the foundation's archive. I thought you should read it. Lucas unfolded the paper with trembling hands. His eyes scanned each word slowly, and as he reached the final line, his lips parted but no sound came out. A tear rolled down his cheek, followed by another. She forgave me, he whispered. All this time, she forgave me. Elena nodded, her own voice breaking. Maybe that is why we met, Lucas, so you could finally know. He lowered the letter, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. You were never just part of a contract, he said. You were the answer to a prayer I never had the courage to say. Elena took a step closer. Then stop running from it. You cannot keep punishing yourself for surviving. Lucas folded the letter carefully, his hands steady now. You think forgiveness is that simple? She smiled softly. It is never simple, but it starts with believing you deserve it. The sound of waves filled the silence between them. Lucas reached for her hand, not as a gesture of pity, but as a man finally choosing to live. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe without guilt. He looked toward the horizon and said quietly, maybe love does not die with the people we lose. Maybe it waits until we are ready to feel it again. Elena's eyes met his, warm and certain. Then maybe you are finally ready. Behind them, the sea shimmered beneath the moonlight, soft and endless like forgiveness itself. The following weeks unfolded like quiet waves, steady, reflective, and filled with unspoken change. The air between Lucas and Elena no longer carried the tension of strangers bound by a deal. Instead, it held something gentler, something real. Lucas began spending less time on business calls and more time walking with Ben along the shore. They built sandcastles, chased the tide, and collected shells that Ben later arranged on the porch rail. Every small moment felt new, as if life had given Lucas another chance to see what truly mattered. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the foundation's board. It was an official notice regarding the contract's final review. Lucas had been invited to attend a meeting in the city to confirm his emotional and social rehabilitation. If approved, the remaining trust, a vast sum that once defined his identity, would be released under his full control. Elena found him reading the letter in silence. You are going to take it, right? She asked. Lucas looked up slowly. I do not know anymore. Um, she frowned. It is what you have been working for. He folded the paper and set it down. I used to believe that money could fix everything, but the only thing it ever did was keep me from facing the truth. Elena studied him for a moment. So what will you do? I think, he said, it is time to let go. A week later, Lucas traveled back to the city for the meeting. The board members congratulated him on his recovery, praising his renewed sense of purpose. One of them, an old friend of his late wife, smiled warmly and said, "She would be proud of you, Lucas. You kept your promise." He thanked them, but when the chairman handed him the contract for release of funds, he paused. The pen hovered above the line for a long moment. Then he placed it down. I am grateful for what this foundation has done, he said calmly, but I do not need this anymore. I would like to transfer the remaining funds to a children's hospital under my wife's name. Let her legacy continue where it truly belongs. The room fell silent. The chairman looked surprised, then nodded with quiet respect. You are sure? I have never been more certain, Lucas replied. When he returned home that evening, Elena was waiting by the porch, the golden light of sunset casting a warm glow around her. Ben ran to him first, holding up a seashell. Look, we found this today. It is shaped like a heart. Lucas took the shell, smiling. It is perfect. Oh, Elena looked at him, sensing something had changed. How did it go? I gave it all away, he said simply. Every dollar, every reminder of what I used to be. She stared at him in disbelief. Why? He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter from his late wife, now folded neatly inside a small glass frame. Because I finally understood what she meant. Love does not live in what we keep, it lives in what we give. Elena's eyes softened. You really did learn how to live with it. And Lucas smiled faintly. No, he said. You taught me how. As the sun dipped into the horizon, the three of them stood together, watching the waves roll against the shore. For the first time, Lucas felt no weight on his chest, no voice of guilt in his mind. Just peace, simple, steady peace. He turned to Elena, his voice low but sure. When this began, I only needed someone to play a part. Now I cannot imagine life without you in it. Pausing, Elena reached for his hand, her eyes glistening in the golden light. Then stop imagining, she whispered. The ocean wind moved around them softly, carrying the scent of salt and new beginnings. For Lucas Hayes, the man once defined by wealth, this was the moment he finally understood what true fortune really meant. The following morning, the world felt different, not louder or brighter, just calmer, as if something heavy had finally lifted. The sea was smooth like glass, and the air smelled of salt and jasmine from the garden near the porch. Lucas stood at the water's edge with Ben beside him, holding a small wooden box. Inside were white rose petals and a copy of the letter from his late wife. Elena walked toward them, her hair moving gently in the wind. She carried 2 candles, their flames flickering against the morning light. Lucas turned to her with a soft smile. I thought we could say goodbye properly, he said. They walked closer to the waves. Ben held one of the candles carefully, while Lucas opened the box and let the rose petals scatter over the water. The petals drifted away, spinning slowly in the tide, carried farther and farther until they blended with the sea. Elena stepped beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. She would be proud of you, Lucas. He nodded. I hope she found peace. Because now I finally understand what she was trying to give me. Not guilt, not grief, but permission to live. Ben looked up at him and asked, Does that mean you are not sad anymore? Lucas knelt down and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Sadness never really disappears, Ben, but it does not have to stop you from being happy. The boy smiled, and Lucas felt his heart swell in a way he had not known in years. When Ben reached out and called him Dad for the very first time, the world seemed to stand still. It was not a word of obligation, it was a word of belonging. Tears filled Lucas's eyes as he pulled Ben close. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat on the porch watching the sun dip lower over the ocean. The light turned golden, painting everything in warm tones. Elena leaned against the railing, her expression peaceful. You know, she said softly, this house finally feels like a home. Lucas looked at her and smiled. It does, because it is no longer filled with ghosts. She glanced at him, her eyes gentle but strong. So what happens now? He took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Now we live. Not perfectly, not without scars, but together. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the last glow of daylight. I think that is what real healing looks like. Oh, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Lucas reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on her lap. Inside was a ring, simple, silver, and engraved with the words, "For what comes next." "Elena," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I do not want another contract. I do not need promises written on paper. I just want one promise that you will stay, if your heart tells you to." She looked at the ring, then at him. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was calm and sure. "My heart already decided," she said. Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, and the two of them sat quietly as the waves shimmered in the fading light. The sound of the ocean filled the spaces between their words, steady and eternal. In that moment, there were no more deals, no more guilt, no more pretending. There was only a man, a woman, and a child, three souls who had found each other in the ruins of their past. The camera of memory closed on that image. A family standing by the sea as the sun sank behind them, golden light spilling across the water. And in that glow, one truth remained. Love had done what time alone could not. It had healed what was broken and turned loss into something beautiful. That was the miracle of forgiveness. That was the true ending of the millionaire whose soul was healed by a widow.